perhaps pop it in the chat box. But how many of you were at the last session around learner agency? Who was in that session? You guys were fantastic. Has that helped? Has that been a good thing? Yeah, we've got a few nods and a few fantastic. The learning landscape that we're talking about today is just a cover story for developing that learner agency. When I wrote this book, it was a way of allowing us to talk about that idea of particularly learnership, as I talked about it in the last session, that idea of becoming an active, skillful learner. And that's what I want to share a little bit of that story with you today. And if you want to know more, I offer an online course as well. So it's a little bit of a taster into this book, a little bit of an exploration of the learning landscape, and an invitation to learn more if it's something that's going to help you build learner agency in your students. So let's jump into it. I can see the chat box when I'm looking over here, and I can see your smiling faces. So if you've got things to ask, just throw them in the chat box as we go along. There's about 8 or 10 of us here today now. There'll be another 60 or so people watching the recording. So from time to time, I'll mention those people. Hello to everyone watching the recording. For those of you watching the recording, email me with your questions along the way. And for anyone else that's here, into the chat box and away we go. Look, the learning landscape is a metaphor. It's a story. It's a way to bring learning to life. All that work we've been hearing about for the last 5 or more years about visible learning, helping students see their learning. This is what the learning landscape is all about. It's about bringing learning to life and helping learners see themselves as active, skillful learners. In this landscape, there's a few elements that we need to understand. The first is that in the learning landscape, the land represents our knowledge and understandings. As we move through the landscape, as we explore in this direction or in this direction, we uncover new knowledge and understandings. So in that way, we get to map a student's learning journey. We don't know what's over here yet. We haven't been there. Let's go and explore that part of the learning landscape. The metaphor allows us to use these very active verbs, if you can have a non-active verb. Within the learning landscape, height represents difficulty, complexity. And you can think of the layers, the strata in the rocks, like year levels or levels of difficulty. If you're using different level readers, for example, each one would be on a different strata of rock. And as you climb higher and higher and higher, you climb these mountains of expertise. And so we're all born down in the lowlands. We're all born not able to do very much, but we spend our lives getting better and better and better and climbing towards these mountains of expertise. And when we see people that are exceptionally good at things, they're standing on top of this mountain or this one or this one. And they're different topics. Now, this might be the expertise in tennis, and this one might be maths, and this one might be something else. So we explore our own area of expertise and climb the mountains within that area. Of course, the topic of today, as we climb those mountains, it's not an easy journey. As we explore the learning landscape, we encounter these challenge pits. And the challenge pit is a way of representing how we overcome difficulty. They're not learning pits, as some other people call them, because the pit represents not the learning, it represents the challenge. And we're going to talk about 4 different sorts of challenges today. Of course, in the learning landscape, there are paths. Where are they? They're here. There are paths that guide our way through the learning landscape, and that's like our curriculum documents. And of course, there are the learners that are climbing towards the tops of these mountains. And importantly, something we'll talk about today, is that these mountaineers, these learners, these climbers, carry with them on their backpacks, or carry on their backs, backpacks full of these habits of mind. And most importantly in the learning landscape is, of course, our learners. And when you look at the learners in the learning landscape, one of the essential characteristics is that all learners are the same. As you look at the learners in the learning landscape here, what you'll notice is that they're all the same, but they're doing different things. Where you go, how high you climb, whether you can climb out of that challenge pit or not, isn't a function of who you are. It's a function of what you do. And because of that story, that we're all the same, and if you want to climb up here, then you have to do what other people have done to climb up there. This whole narrative acts as what I call a growth mindset mover. It helps you develop a more growth-orientated mindset in students as they understand that it's up to them and what they do, not who they are. There's no one with longer arms or stronger legs or an extra tail or anything like that that makes it easier to move through the learning landscape. All learners are the same. In the learning landscape, the way we're talking about it today, or the part of the learning landscape that we're focusing on today, is around these challenge pits. And I want to spend just a little bit of time sort of talking about the anatomy, if you like, of a challenge pit. On this side of the challenge pit, the side where the learner starts, this is what I call the near side of the learning pit. And the near side represents all our prior learning. This is everything we bring to a learning situation. The students here, the land beneath their feet is the prior knowledge. This is what they learned in grade 1, and this is what they learned in grade 2 and 3 and 4. The learner comes equipped with their tools and strategies that are used to get out of other learning pits, or challenge pits, I should say, in the past. This side of our challenge pit, the far side of the challenge pit, represents the new knowledge and understandings. This is where we're going. This is something we don't know yet. And importantly, you'll notice in this challenge pit that our learner is starting on this side, this high up, but finishing on this side, this high up. And I said before that in the learning landscape, height represents challenge and difficulty. So when we finish this high, higher than we started over here, we're learning something more difficult and more complex. And this is going to become a critical point to the story we tell in this session. Because when you realize that the change in height represents how much more difficult, how much more complex something that we're learning is, we start to realize that not all challenges are the same. We often draw a challenge pit this way, but not all challenges are hard. Who's done something that you'd say was new but wasn't difficult? Right, we do that sort of stuff with students all the time. And some of our challenges are what I call downhill challenges. We start at this level of difficulty and we go down to something easy. And this type of challenge feels like a task. It feels like just something that has to be done. And it's, for example, as adults, learning your 13 times tables. How many of you know your 13 times tables? Not overwhelming hands going up. How many of you could know them by this time tomorrow? You could all know them by this time tomorrow. Learning your 13 times tables is what I call an easy thing that you just haven't done yet. It's part of the learning landscape that you could easily get to by going downhill, but you've just never gone there. This highlights one of the big misunderstandings people have about their comfort zone. We often hear people talk about, we've got to get outside our comfort zone, got to get outside our comfort zone. The trouble with that is that very often people confuse getting outside their comfort zone with just doing something new. And when you get outside your comfort zone and just explore something new and not more difficult, that's not really outside your comfort zone at all. To be outside your comfort zone is to do something more difficult, not just something easy and new. So these sorts of tasks, these sorts of challenges where the challenge pit goes downhill is what feels like a task. It might result in you learning something new, but it doesn't result in you learning something more difficult, more challenging. It doesn't raise your standards at all. And then there are challenges like this. This is what I call a performance challenge. This is where you do your best. You've performed at this level before, at this level of difficulty, and now you're performing at it again. You're doing another performance at your highest standard. And very often, as teachers in work situations, this is where we are all the time. We're doing our best, sometimes even less than our best, but often just doing our best over and over again, which is what an employer wants us to do. They want us to do our best. These sorts of tasks, these sorts of challenges feel like a performance. What I'm doing right now, I'm monitoring myself. I'm thinking about, am I covering the points that need to be made? Am I articulating myself clearly? I'm doing my best, as poor as it might be, but I'm doing my best right now to get this message across, that not all challenges are the same, and that when we look at the nature of a challenge pit, whether it takes us downhill or whether it takes us straight across, helps us determine what we need to do. Because some challenges, and the sorts of challenges we like to set in schools, look like this. We start at this level, but we come out at this level, and we go through what is called our learning zone. And this type of challenge feels like a problem. It makes us, I don't know how to do this. How's this done? It's a stretch, not a strain. This is what you might have heard called as the zone of proximal development. You've heard that term? I don't call it the zone of proximal development because I've never seen a student proximately develop. I see students learn, so I call it a learning zone. But this sort of challenge where you start here and have to go higher demands something of you that you haven't done before. You're going to need to grow. You're going to have to do something and perform in a way, behave in a way that you haven't in the past. And if you're following along with the pattern here, there's a fourth challenge pit. And sometimes challenge pits look like this. I'll go this side. Downhill challenges take us through our comfort zone. The level challenge, the performance challenge, takes it through our performance zone. The ones that stretch us just a little bit take us through our learning zone. But there are many challenges in the world that we can't expect to achieve in one go. They're too hard. They don't stretch us, they strain us. If you asked one of your 5-year-olds to do advanced calculus, clearly the challenge would feel like this. And I want you to take a moment to reflect on that. How do students feel when they're in this sort of challenge? Because one of the jobs that we need to do as teachers is to make sure the sorts of challenges we're setting students are this challenging in their learning zone, not this challenging, because you will fail if the challenge is this difficult. And by the same token, we don't want too many challenges that are downhill either. When we talk about building learner agency, that ability to recognize the type of challenge you're in, to recognize the zone you're working in, and what each of those zones require of us, is one of the skills of becoming a skillful learner. So this image, and this is one of the images that I'll send you as a follow-up to the webinar. So if you're watching it now, we'll send you this image as a JPEG or a PDF or something or another. For those of you watching the recording, you will have got a link to this in your follow-up email. But down here in our learning zone, in our comfort zone, these are easy things we can do easily, and things we might have done before. Our performance zone demands our best. It demands everything of us, our maximum concentration to reach the same standard, our same previous best as before. Our learning zone demands something more, and this is really what we're here to talk about today. It's not just to talk about the nature of this pit, but what it takes to get out of this challenge pit. And of course, there are some challenges that we need to break down. We can head in that direction later on, but we've got to get through this sort of challenge first. And so one of the other images that I'll share with you is this one, helping students recognise what sort of challenge are you taking on today. And in fact, if you'll bear with me just one moment, whoops, here we go. This is a work in progress, so I'll share it with you now. Don't you love cut and paste and doing things like this? What we're putting together for you, like this, if I put it together, here we go, is a little way of helping students understand, or folded it the wrong way, what sort of challenge they're taking on. So what this does, and you'll have to just bear with me as it doesn't work very well at the moment, but it allows you to change by moving up and down this type of challenge of the student is setting. So you can actually move this. You can put it on a student's desk and say, what sort of challenge pit are you in at the moment? Are you going downhill? Are you about level? Are you going uphill a little bit? Or is it one of those aspirational challenges? With stiff paper, it works much better. Who'd like to just put in the chat box, does that seem like a useful tool to help students talk about the nature of their challenge? I'll look across the chat box and see how people feel about that, because that's one of the resources we're building for you. So we've got these 4 challenge pits. In the challenge pit, height represents complexity and difficulty. The pit itself represents the nature of the challenge, not the learning. The learning is represented by what you do to get through. And that's a critical point, because the way other people use the challenge pit, you go down into confusion and out into clarity. That's not how I use it at all. In my challenge pit, we go down into our past knowledge. We draw on the things we know. Sure, it feels challenging and uncertain. You have to put in effort and struggle to climb out the other side. But when you climb out the other side, you've learned something new and more difficult. Good. Thanks, Jess and Camrel. I apologise if I pronounced that badly. So let's talk about getting out of the challenge pit, because this is the part that really is the whole point of the exercise. And to do that, we're going to talk about these habits of mind. The theory goes something like this. I'll step out of the way for a moment. In fact, I'll do it on this side. Our student, here he is up here, comes along and you've set a new challenge. And here's the challenge they've been set. The theory is they do this. They jump in, they climb up the other side, they get to here, they get out the other side, and woohoo, they have learnt something new. That's the theory. In practice, how many of your students do you witness like this? Sure, they start over here, they get in, they climb to the other side. They get to the bit where it starts getting really difficult. Remember, this was your comfort zone and your performance zone. Now they're in that bit that stretches and challenges them. And what happens next? Uh-oh. Some of these kids fall back in. In light of this analogy, do you have any students that get stuck in the bottom of the challenge pit? They jump in, or perhaps you push them into the challenge pit. They try to scramble up the other side. They get the easy stuff done, But as soon as it starts getting difficult, they fail and fail and fail. Who's got students that are a bit like that? We have a couple of cameras on, so thanks for keeping your cameras on, folks. Helps me a lot. These are the students that we need to help. Now, a couple of things are going on here. If they have, thanks for flicking cameras back on. If they've experienced this over and over and over again, they'll go through what I call a cascade of emotions. The first slip, that's not a big deal. But by the time they fail again and again and again and again, they build up this sense of fear. And this is what the fixed mindset is. The fixed mindset is very much the fear mindset, because it leaves you on this side of the challenge pit going, I'm not getting in there. Last time I got in there, I got stuck in the bottom, and we end up not even wanting to get in the first place. One of the big mindset movers that pushes students between towards the fixed end of the continuum, because mindset is a continuum, it's not fixed or growth. That's another story altogether. But one of the big negative mindset movers is that experience of failure. And what students end up doing is that after they've failed, they'll say, I can't. Jimmy over there, Jimmy, he's a smart kid. He can do those sort of things, but I'm not like Jimmy. And what he does, these students, is they blame it on who they are. Now, you remember I said right at the start of this session that in the learning landscape, all learners are the same. And whether you climb out of the challenge pit isn't about who you are. It's about what you do. Now, for those of you who are paying close attention, our two learners, the one that climbed out to the other side and the one that got stuck in the bottom here, there was a difference. What was the difference between the learner that got out and the learner that's got stuck in the bottom? Did you notice something on the image? The learner that got out was wearing this backpack. And this is how we help students understand that if you've got stuck in the bottom of the challenge pit, it's not because you're not good at this. It's because there's something missing from your backpack. And that backpack is where we put students' habits of mind. And this is the work, of course, of Art Costa and Bennett Kalick, drawn largely from this book and a whole series of preceding books. I've had the privilege of working with Art Costa and Bennett Kalick for the last 25 years or so. And this work is foundational to helping students understand what it takes to succeed at increasingly difficult problems. Because what we're asking students to do as we set these learning challenges is to succeed at something more difficult than they've done before. To succeed at something that's only as challenging as you've done before, you can use what's already in your backpack. But to succeed at something more difficult, you're going to need to fill your backpack with new tools and strategies. And this metaphor, and I'll get to this definition in just a second, but this metaphor, the story we tell with the learning landscape, allows us to have that conversation with students. It allows us to have that conversation that says, all right, you didn't get out of that challenge pit. Why? And the student will start saying perhaps that, I'm just not smart, I'm just not good at maths, I'm just not good at spelling or whatever it is. You say, no, it's not you. You're missing something in your backpack. Let me tell you a quick story. Year 11 and 12 English. My teachers used to ask me to do some creative writing. And look, I was compliant, I would do the work. But I remember one time in the early year 12, the teacher came in and said, boys, it was a boys' school, boys, we're going to do some creative writing today. And I just went, why? No, seriously, why? Like, I'll give it my best. I will do my very, very best. I'm not slacking off here. But I gave it my best all last year. And all last year, all I got was a C- or a D+ the whole year. Let's save ourselves both the time. Just give me a C- or a D+. That's what I'm going to get. You see, the only strategy my year 11 and 12 teachers had to help me become a better creative writer, to reach a new higher standard, was to keep pushing me into the challenge bit, to give me more writing to do. And all that happened was I'd climb halfway up to the C- D+ standard that I got before I fell back in. Get to the same level over and over again. Who's got students where that happens? They get to the same standard, never quite improve, or who's experienced it themselves? What my teachers should have done is said, James, you're right. After 20 or 30 goes, we've worked out you're not really equipped to do much better, are you? Let's look at what's in your toolbox. Let's look what's in your backpack. Can you take your backpack off for me, metaphorically, empty it out, show me how you go about doing it? And what would have happened, I would have talked about how I generate creative ideas, which was pretty much boiled down to, I think stuff up. I had no deliberate strategies to help me be a more creative writer. And so if the teacher then came along and said, here's a strategy for you, James. Put your last 10 stories out here. Read the first paragraph. And for me, my first paragraph in all my creative stories sounded like this. I was walking down a path. I was driving down a road. I was sailing across an ocean. I was paddling down the river. Every story I wrote started as a journey. And if the teacher just said, here's the strategy I want you to use, don't do that. Don't do what you've done every other time. Find a way to start a story that isn't moving. Just that would have given me one more strategy that I could apply to my creative writing that could have helped me get to a slightly higher standard. Because what Art Costa and Bennett Kalick did when they talked about these habits of mind is that they went out and they looked at people who were in the very, very best in their field and in the business of getting better. And what they described were dispositions, right? Typical patterns of behaviors, the tools and strategies they used all the time, that were skillfully and mindfully employed by these characteristically successful people, the people that were doing well when they were in their learning zone. What Art Costa and Bennett Kalick identified were the patterns of behavior that people climbing the highest in the learning landscape engaged in when they're in the business of trying to get better and better and better. But I've missed the two most important words, and they are the words skillfully and mindfully. It is not that these people had the tools in the backpack and the other people didn't. It's that these people learned how to engage in the habits of mind well. And this is where, when we look at these habits, and if you don't know the habits of mind, we'll include a copy in the follow-up email that'll come to you soon. The habits of mind aren't 16 tools to collect. It's not that students persist and others don't, that some manage their impulsivity and others won't, some think flexibly and others can't. What these people do is they get very, very good at using these habits of mind. And in fact, that word, over the last 20 years, as I've worked with schools around the world to infuse habits of mind into their curriculum, the tipping point, the one thing that makes all the difference is when you when you change, from using the word use, habits of mind, to start talking about how you improve your habits of mind, how you develop, extend, build, increase, how you build a repertoire of practice for your habits of mind. And this is what you put in your backpack. When you talk to our students about how they achieve more difficult, more challenging problems, they have to think not just about what they're learning, but also about how they are learning. And the metaphor of the backpack and filling it with your habits of mind gives us that narrative to allow us to talk about How are you going about learning? We don't need to have that conversation if you're going downhill. So when we look at our challenges again, we don't need to have that conversation when we're going downhill. When we're going downhill, we can use the tools that are already in our backpack. When we're performing like I am today and like you do most of the time in your classroom, you can draw on the strategies that are there, all of them, your best ones, the ones that give you your peak current performance. But if you want to do better, if you want to climb higher, if you want to reach new standards, you need to look at what's in your backpack and fill it with the tools you need for the job. So when we look at this image more closely, our climber is actually speaking. And in speaking, he's saying that, this is more difficult than I've done before. I'm going to have to fill my backpack with new tools. For our performance challenge, this is about as hard as I've done before. I'll have to use all the tools in my backpack. Whoops, down here. Still getting my weather girl thing going. This sort of challenge, the downhill challenge, it's not going to be challenging at all. You can do this without much effort at all. And these ones, not going to be able to do it today. It's too much of a stretch in one go. So what we've tried to talk about here is just introduce you to some of the key ideas in the learning landscape, to talk about how this narrative of the learning landscape brings learning to life. It gives us a language to talk about learning that students can hold on to. It gives them a way of being active learners. So I'm not sure about you, but when I talk to a lot of teachers, they tell me students these days, a lot of them are passive learners. They want learning to be done to them. This metaphor makes it clear that what they achieve, what they learn, where they go, how high they climb is up to what they do in the classroom. And that opens up that whole space that we talked about in the learner agency piece that we did a few weeks ago about being skillful learners. Because once you understand that you can move through the learning landscape, you can climb higher and it's all up to you, then the next sensible question to ask is, how do I get really good at moving through the learning landscape? And that opens up that conversation around what it means to be a skillful learner. My personal feeling that I've built on, I think, a long history in education is that we focus a lot on teacher actions, teacher behaviour. We've got a lot of focus on what quality teaching looks like, the standard of teaching. And that's good, that's all important. And I get that we need to focus on that. I also get, maybe a little bit cynically, that there's a political agenda around focusing on teacher behaviours only, that we need to demonstrate the teachers are doing a good job, etc., etc. That's all right. But it's only half the equation. The teacher can be doing the best job in the world, but if students are sitting there passively, not knowing what sort of challenges they're taking on, not recognising what's in their backpack, relying on teachers to fill their backpacks for them rather than taking that responsibility on themselves, then as good as the guide the teacher might be, they're not ultimately going to climb very high in the learning landscape, particularly when they leave the classroom. Cool. I'm just looking at a few messages that come through. So that's pretty much what I wanted to share with you today. I know I overstretched you last time. These little short webinars are meant to be half an hour, and I went for an hour last time without thinking about it. I've gone 5 or 6 minutes over this time. But this concept of the learning landscape, the work that we talk about in here, as I've said 3 or 4 times, helps us tell a narrative in our classroom that helps students understand the nature of challenge. Why is one challenge easier than the other? Helps them understand what they need to do in the face of the challenge to fill their backpacks or draw on what they've done before and expect similar results to what they've done before. And it helps us open up that conversation about becoming a skillful learner. Now, I have a whole online course that explores the learning landscape with you, that talks about how we fill learners' backpacks with habits of mind, how we teach them about the nature of challenges, how we build learner agency by teaching them to be more skillful learners, how they respond to mistakes and feedback, how they distribute their effort and energy. I'd invite you to, on this side, come along, we'll send you a link. There's always the option of doing a self-paced version, just in your own time as a school, or as an individual, I should say. Or if the whole school wants to develop this, I'm just working with a number of schools around New Zealand at the moment doing this work. And I can guide your whole school through this learning process. Or in the coming weeks, we're launching a coached version where there'll be 4 or 5 webinars over term 2, where you can jump on board and I'll sort of walk you through how to explore the learning landscape with your students. So before we wrap up, just looking across, are there questions, thoughts, reactions that you might want me to explore with you before I let you go home to your families and loved ones? I'll give you a moment. Take yourself off mute if you'd like, or you can type into the chat box and I'll see your questions there. The learning, I should tell you too, Learning Network New Zealand sells my book, and they also sell posters of the images you saw back here. So this poster and the other poster as well. I can see 1 or 2 people typing away. Tell me if this has been good for you today. Jane's enjoyed it, I can see that. I can see Robbie, Maureen, John, Dawn, Jackie, Jess, Rebecca, all got their cameras off. Diane, Dawn, a couple of people. Yvonne, it looks like you've got your camera on, but perhaps not plugged in or something. Anyway. Yeah, if you're using habits of mind, hey everyone, people turn their cameras on now, great, fantastic. Jane, one of the other things we'll pop into the link, how many other people are using habits of mind? Give us just a bit of a wave. Yeah, if you have some sort of, yeah. We'll also send you in the follow-up email a link to a webinar I ran earlier this year. I can't remember when it was, January, I suppose, where I talk about how to get started with habits of mind and some of the key elements. There's a lot of work going on with habits of mind at the moment. We're just producing, fingers crossed very soon, launching it, an assessment tool that will help students recognise how well developed their habits of mind are, to let them look inside that backpack and to let them look on this far side of the challenge pit and to say, what tools will this challenge need? And to see if they've got the tools that are up for the job. So we're very excited to be releasing soon a new app that will allow you to look inside students' backpacks, but we've got a few glitches to work out before then. Cool. Jess has said that Laura and I have made positive connections between this and the learning pit, which, yeah. So my work is very deliberately a challenge pit, not a learning pit. The learning pit is slightly different. I don't think kids are going to notice the difference, but it's probably worthwhile being aware of what they are before we sort of get crossed wires. Cool. That's all right, Dawn. I forgive you for not having your camera on. Hey, Jane's just put her hand up, and while I'm just getting to talk to her as well, the next session, I believe, is on mistakes early next term. I am really looking forward to that. The work that I want to share with you around helping students identify mistakes. And I don't mean the mistake in their work, I mean the type of mistake they're making is going to add a level of, sophistication, really powerful sophistication you are teaching. It's really good work. Jane, you had something to say, I think.
Thanks, James. Dawn and I have had a conversation privately. She's from Learning Network, and I think somebody was going to come in at about 4:30 and have a chat to everybody.
Oh.
So I'm not sure what timing everyone was expecting today.
So in other words, I got it too short. I thought we had an hour last time and was told I went over, and now this time I went under. I'm happy to not, I don't want to stretch it out if people haven't got something they want me to talk about. But perhaps if Dawn's coming in, we might need to record her message or just put it in the follow-up email.
Yep.
We're not going to hang around for 20 minutes if Dawn's, yeah. Dawn, is that the Dawn that's on the call right now, Jane? Yes, obviously.
I'm on again, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Dawn, is there anything we can do to mitigate this?
Dawn, are you there? Do you want to come off mute?
Cool.
Not sure.
All right. We will send on Learning Network's messages. All right, folks, I think we've done what we wanted to do. As I said, Learning Network has the posters. They have my book. We'll send you a link to the course. We'll send you a link to some of these images and also to the Habits of Mind webinar that I did a while back as well for those of you interested in pursuing more about habits of mind. But until we talk to you about mistakes, I hope you're about to go on holiday, aren't you, this week? This is the last week? Enjoy your holidays. I'll talk to you on the other side.